So last week we were discussing what triggers are, how they're created, and what they're trying to show you. This week I plan to show you the steps to take to identify the feeling or emotion that is associated with that belief and use it to go ahead and start to heal. So we last left off asserting, I know I have options, and reflecting on what those options are. Ultimately getting to a place where you can assert to yourself, I am clearly being triggered in this moment. What is this trigger trying to show me about my beliefs? Typically, when you have been triggered, you will experience negative emotion, and that's what a trigger is. For example, we'll say that once upon a time when you were younger, you were trying to do something nice for a family member and you innocently made a mess and gotten extremely big trouble for making the mess when your intention was to do something nice. So maybe you created a belief system in your subconscious mind that says doing things nice for people is only going to get me in trouble. So you avoid doing nice things for people in the future with a subconscious fear. It's not a conscious fear, but a subconscious fear that negative results will come out of that in the end. So you avoid doing nice things for people. You may be triggered when you see someone else doing something nice for someone and getting praised for it. That might really trigger you because it goes against the belief system that you developed when you were younger, which was validated over and over again in your life. So what would we do? We would see that somebody is doing something nice for someone else and getting recognition or getting a positive reaction. Feel that trigger immensely. Notice, well, that really pissed me off that this person did this nice thing, and who do they think they're so special because they got recognition? Why do I feel that way? What is making me feel that way? And really sit with it and really reflect on the feelings, identify with the feeling. Okay, and that's what we're going to go through today. What do we do now that we've sat with it? We have identified that we have been triggered, and we can, from this negative feeling place, somehow get ourselves to a place where we're willing to examine it and use it to identify the feeling associated with and where it's coming from. And that's what we're going to get into now. Step 1. Recognize I'm being triggered. For example, I received a text from my boss today. The text triggered me even before opening it. I recognize that I'm being triggered right now by the emotions that looking at the text has brought up. Step 2. Realize something is trying to come up to be healed. Example, I know that I was feeling fine before I saw the text, and that my feelings behind just seeing my boss's name has created an irrational level of emotion, and I recognize that. It is clear that something needs to be healed here in order for me to move forward. Step 3. Identify the emotion underlying the trigger. Once you identify the emotion underlying a trigger, I've noticed that here you can experience the rising of a coping mechanism. And that happens because when we're about to confront something that makes us uncomfortable, it's the reason we created the belief in the first place. The trigger is shining a light on something that we're not consciously aware of. When you hold that mirror in front of your face and you actually take responsibility for it and say, I created this for a reason and I want to examine it, a lot of the times a coping mechanism kicks in a way to avoid what's on the other side of the mirror. So take note of that. That may happen. I really think you should use it to get to know yourself better and realize how you're coping with things.
Step 4. In step 4, you're going to identify the source of the initial trigger and the subsequent emotion that follows. This could also be a coping mechanism or a self-sabotaging behavior. An example of this would be the source of the initial trigger could be the text from the boss. the subsequent emotion, an emotion like anger, rage, irritation, or even a desire to avoid the trigger object. And the self-sabotaging behavior or coping mechanism that follows could be, I stopped engaging in my day and I began to isolate myself. Step 5. Think back to a time prior to the trigger object manifesting itself and identify thoughts of resistance that you may have been thinking. For example, prior to getting triggered by my boss's text, I can remember thinking about my financial security and feeling slightly but increasingly uneasy and worried that I won't be able to provide security to myself and my family. I estimate I've probably been thinking about this more and more over the past 3 days. When you are resistant to something, you can notice it by negative thought patterns on that subject. These thoughts focus on the things that you don't want, and that, in essence, is resistance. This resistance can be used to find what you do want. So when identifying thoughts of resistance, you want to pay close attention to the thoughts you're having that are participating in the lack thereof, what you don't have, what you don't like, and use them to think about the opposite of that, what you would prefer, what you do have, what you do like. And that is a way to change resistant thoughts. Which brings us to step 6. In step 6, we find the symbolism behind the trigger object. What does the trigger object represent to you? In this example, the trigger object is the text from the boss. When I think about the feelings or the thoughts that are associated with the trigger object, I noticed resistant thought. And when I follow those resistant thoughts, as discussed previously, I come to understand that it's not the actual text that is triggering me. Just seeing the name of my boss has created an emotional reaction or a trigger. And the thoughts that ensue from that trigger would be something like, my old boss reminds me that I am not good enough. He symbolizes my own failures and inadequacies. I am all too aware of his power over me and my family's security and my lack of ability to provide that security on my own. Think of your own triggers. What has the ability to, in an instant, create a profound emotional reaction? What kind of thoughts follow immediately to that reaction? Really pay attention. Focus on what your thoughts are in response to this trigger. Think to yourself, what does this trigger mean to me? What do I feel? What are the basis of my thoughts? That's step 6. Step 7. Identify with the feelings or emotions associated with the beliefs located in step 6. That being, I believe that I am not good enough. I believe that I am a failure. I believe I am inadequate. Use the symbolism found in step 6 to create beliefs. So whereas in step 6, the example was, my old boss reminds me that I am not good enough, in step 7, I believe I am not good enough. The premise here being that no one can make you think anything. You are in total control of your own thoughts and feelings. And if someone makes you feel a certain way, then what's being uncovered is that you actually feel that way about yourself, subconsciously. Lastly, when attempting to identify the feelings or emotions associated with these beliefs, it can be helpful to use an emotional tone scale while you reflect on them. The emotional tone scale is available a PDF format on my website at www.soultherapytct.com/triggers. In this situation, I would identify with dark gray. Dark gray indicates insecurity, guilt, and unworthiness. It is very helpful to find out where you are on the tone scale. What is the closest emotion that you can get to that's of a higher vibration? So that brings us to the end of the second part of this series, identifying the belief underlying the trigger. Join me next week for the final video for this series entitled What is the Truth Healing Exercise, where I go over with you how to use what we've learned so far, put it all together in an exercise, a journaling exercise, to take the trigger, find the belief, and finally heal the belief.